The book of Deuteronomy concluded with two final messages from Moses, the Song of Moses and the final blessings of Moses over the tribes of Israel. The book of Joshua also concluded with two final messages. Joshua spoke his farewell address to the people and then gathered the people before God for the renewal of the covenant. Likewise, the books of Samuel conclude with two messages from David. The first is his song of praise addressed to Jehovah. The second is a prophecy or promise addressed to Israel about the coming of a righteous king. The similarity of the conclusion of David's life to that of Moses and Joshua firmly establishes David with Moses and Joshua as God's chosen servant. Moses brought Israel out of slavery and into covenant with God. Joshua brought Israel into the promised land. David established God's kingdom in the land and brought rest to Israel. David's final message to Israel promised a rest yet to come. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is the promise of rest. As David's life was coming to an end, he spoke a song of praise to the Lord. 2 Samuel 22:1. Then David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Some commentators conclude that David wrote this song early in his life when the Lord first delivered him from the hand of Saul. However, other commentators conclude that David must have written this song towards the end of his life, when God had delivered him from all his enemies, not just from Saul. The Jewish sage Abarbanel concluded that David wrote this song early in his life and sang it throughout his life whenever he experienced victory. Its placement here at the end of the account of David's life indicates that whether David wrote this song early or late in his life, he did sing it later in his life. The contents of the song reflect David's victory over the many physical and spiritual battles that he faced. A second version of this song is recorded in the book of Psalms as Psalm 18. It is the only one of David's psalms that is included in both the book of Psalms and in this account of his life. Abarbanel explains the reason for its inclusion here. Abarbanel explains that while David's other songs relate to isolated incidents in his life, this song refers to the general theme of salvation from adversity. In fact, David's song of deliverance is reminiscent of the Song of the Sea, Israel's song of deliverance after they crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, which is recorded in Exodus 15. This similarity is emphasized by the structure of the songs. Both songs are written in alternating 2 columns and 3 columns, as if Israel is passing between the 2 columns of waters as they cross the Red Sea. David used some of the same metaphors and descriptions that Moses used in the Song of the Sea. Abarbanel divides David's song into 4 distinct parts. The first section, verses 1 through 3, introduces the theme of the song, that God is man's protector. The second part, verses 4 through 28, describes how God saved David from his enemies. The third part, verses 29 through 46, describes how God not only delivered David from misfortune, but also granted him the strength to overcome and vanquish his enemies. The fourth part, verses 47 to the end, declares his praises to God. In the first section, David uses words relating to a strong fortress built on a cliff to describe God's protection. 2 Samuel 22, 2 and 3. And he said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, the God who is my rock, in him will I trust. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my high tower and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence." In the modern King James translation quoted here, the English word rock is used twice. The first time, the Hebrew word is shelah, number 5553 in Strong's Concordance, meaning a craggy outcropping or a stronghold built on a rock. The second time the word rock is translated from the Hebrew word zur, number 6697, meaning a cliff, rock, or boulder. Some translations of the Bible translate zur in this verse as strength. The word horn is the Hebrew word karen, number 7161, meaning the horn of an animal that is used for protection. However, metaphorically and in line with the other words in this passage, it refers to a mountain peak. The horn of an animal can also be made into a shofar, which is sounded in battle and is compared to the sound of God's voice. David, who frequently took refuge in the cliffs and mountains of Israel, paints a picture of God as a strong fortress on a high mountain or cliff that is victorious in battle. This is the God to whom David successfully calls to for help in the second part of his song. 2 Samuel 22, 4-7. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised, and I shall be saved from my enemies. When the waves of death encircled me, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell hemmed me in. The snares of death went in front of me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried to my God, and he heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry entered into his ears. To strengthen the connection between this song and the Song of the Sea, David used imagery of water, waves of death and floods of ungodly men to describe his peril. David described God's appearance on the scene with imagery to evoke remembrance of his first appearance to Israel in the form of a pillar of fire and a dark cloud as he guided them across the Red Sea and blinded the Egyptians. The quaking of the earth, the smoke, and the lightning all bring up the image of God as he descended upon Mount Sinai. David is connecting his experiences with God's deliverance with the children of Israel's deliverance experience as they came out of Egypt. 2 Samuel 22, 8-17. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of heaven quaked and were shaken because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down with darkness under his feet. He rode upon a cherub and flew, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness canopies around him, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. From the brightness before him, coals of fire were kindled. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning bolts, and he vanquished them. Then the channels of the sea were seen, the foundations of the world were uncovered. At the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils, he sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of many waters. The Jewish sage Rashi compares the channels of the sea to the splitting of the Red Sea, forming walls of water on either side of the Israelites as they crossed on dry ground. David's deliverance, like that of Israel, is described as being out of the water. David goes on to state that the reason God delivered him was that God delighted in David and saw David as righteous. 2 Samuel 22, 20-25. He also brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands he has recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his judgments were before me, and as for his statutes, I did not depart from them. I was also blameless before him, and I kept myself from my iniquity. Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness in his eyes. Similarly, in Deuteronomy 7:7, God told the children of Israel that he chose them because he loved them. We may ask how God could see David as righteous and clean after his adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of Bathsheba's husband Uriah. The NKJV Study Bible comments, David was forgiven those sins when he acknowledged them to the Lord. As is the case with believers today, David could stand in a position of righteousness even as he strove by the power of God's Spirit to live in righteousness. David goes on to extol God's mercy to those who also demonstrate the quality of mercy to others. In the third part of his song, David describes how God delivered him from his enemies by lighting his path, guiding his hands in war, putting him on higher ground, which is an advantage in battle, giving him strength for battle, and defeating his enemies by putting them under David's feet. 2 Samuel 22:32-35. For who is God except the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? God is my strength and power, and he makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of deer, and sets me on high places. He teaches my hands to make war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. After describing all the ways that God had delivered him, David concludes his song with praise to God. 2 Samuel 22:47-51. The Lord lives, blessed be my rock. Let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. It is God who avenges me and subdues the peoples under me. He delivers me from my enemies. You also lift me up above those who rise against me. You have delivered me from the violent man. Therefore I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles, and sing praises to your name. He is the tower of salvation to his king, and shows mercy to his anointed, to David and his descendants forevermore. Notice that David didn't just praise God when he was among his own people in Israel. He praised God in the presence of the Gentiles. In Deuteronomy 4:7-8, God indicated that the entire nation of Israel would be witnesses to God's justness and righteousness. In his final declaration of praise in this song, David refers to himself in 4 different ways: God's king, God's anointed, David, and his descendants. 4 is the number of the fullness of the completion of creation. God completed his creation of the physical universe on the 4th day. On the 5th and 6th days, God used what he had already created to populate the earth. There are 4 seasons in a year and 4 directions on a compass. There are 4 dimensions, 3 of which are physical and the 4th is time. In the last example, 3 are the same and the 4th, time, ties them all together. Similarly, in the 4 Gospels, 3 are considered the synoptic Gospels and the 4th focuses on the spiritual. In this case, the first 3 ways that David refers to himself refer to his selection as king. The 4th refers to the everlasting nature of that choice and the promise of an everlasting anointed king from among his descendants. This leads directly to the last words and prophecy of David, in which David again identifies himself in a 4-fold designation. 2 Samuel 23:1. Now these are the last words of David. Thus says David, the son of Jesse. Thus says the man raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel. The first way that David identified himself was as the son of Jesse, an ordinary human being. The next 3 demonstrate how God chose him and lifted him up. He is the man God raised up to a high place. He is the man that the God of Jacob anointed and called. And lastly, David became, under the influence of the Spirit of God, the sweet psalmist of Israel. It is in the last role that David spoke his final words. Modern commentator Alexander Maclaren and commentators Keel and Delitzsch compare these final words of David with those of Balaam, because Balaam also identified himself in 4 clauses in Numbers 25:3. Keel and Delitzsch explain the connection between Balaam and David's prophecies. This introduction to the prophetic announcement rests, both as to form and substance, upon the last sayings of Balaam concerning the future history of Israel, Numbers 24:3 and Numbers 24:15. This not only shows to what extent David had occupied himself with the utterances of the earlier men of God concerning Israel's future, but indicates at the same time that his own prophetic utterance was intended to be a further expansion of Balaam's prophecy concerning the star out of Jacob and the scepter out of Israel. David's 4-fold introduction continues in a 4-fold declaration that his last words are divinely inspired by God. 2 Samuel 23:2-3. The Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and his word was on my tongue. The God of Israel said, the Rock of Israel spoke to me. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. David employs the technique of parallelism to emphasize that God spoke these words. The first two phrases, "The Spirit of the Lord spoke to me," and "the word was on my tongue," are essentially the same. The words that follow this introduction were not David's words, but God's words spoken through David. Similarly, the next pair of parallel phrases, "The God of Israel said," and "the Rock of Israel spoke to me," indicate that God is the one who is speaking. In each of these four phrases, David declares that God is the one who is speaking through him, and that these words are about the completion of the fullness of creation. God's essential message, which David will elaborate upon, is that the king must rule justly in the fear of God. David follows this statement with a poetic metaphor of how the rule of this king blesses creation. 2 Samuel 23:4. "And he shall be like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, like the tender grass springing out of the earth, by clear shining after rain." David then ties in the rule of the just king with his own house in an ambiguous declaration or perhaps question. 2 Samuel 23:5. "Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting ordinance, ordered in all things and secure. For this is my salvation and all my desire. Will he not make it increase?" In the New King James translation, which we just read, David appears to point out that his house does not live up to the standard of ruling with justice in the fear of the Lord. However, the Hebrew is not as clear in its intent and can be interpreted as the question, "For is not my house so with God?" leading into the next sentence, "For he has made with me an everlasting covenant." So, which one is the correct understanding? Like almost all ambiguous statements in the Bible, the fullness of understanding indicates that both meanings reveal a true aspect of the situation. In reality, David's house did fall far short of the standard of ruling with justice in the fear of God. However, there is a king coming from David's house through the everlasting covenant that God made with David, who will reign in justice in the fear of the Lord. David's house, through this coming ruler, lives up to the standard of justice and the fear of the Lord. David goes on in the next verse to acknowledge the shortfalls of the kings who will rule after him. 2 Samuel 23:6 and 7. "But the sons of rebellion shall all be as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man who touches them must be armed with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they shall be utterly burned with fire in their place." David refers to the unjust ruler as sons of rebellion. However, the literal translation reveals that we have seen these sons of rebellion before. They are the sons of Belial. The Hebrew word Belial, number 1100 in Strong's Concordance, means without profit, worthlessness, destruction, or wickedness. It comes from two Hebrew words, Beli, number 1097, meaning failure, and Yaal, number 3276, meaning to ascend. A literal definition of Belial means failure to ascend. This is the exact opposite of the description that David gave of the just king who is like the light of the morning when the sun rises. Malachi 4:2 uses similar imagery, stating that the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. In contrast, the unjust rulers, the sons of Belial, fail to ascend and will be burned with fire. David stated that the sons of Belial cannot be taken with hands, that is, man cannot handle them directly. Iron or the shaft of a spear must be used. The implication is that the just king is the one who will wield the spear of judgment. This concludes David's final words. The chapter goes on to list the mighty men who served under David. These are real men who actually lived and acted. This account of David is not a myth or legend, but actual history recording true events. The combined books of 1 and 2 Samuel begin and end with songs of praise and prophecy. In 1 Samuel 2, 1 through 10, Hannah pours out her praise to God for the birth of Samuel. Her song concludes with a prophecy about the coming king. 1 Samuel 2:10. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. David described himself as God's king and his anointed. He is the first fulfillment of Hannah's prophecy. He brought rest to Israel, but that rest was not the eternal rest that God promised. This rest is yet to come when the king comes who reigns with justice in the fear of the Lord. But in the first chapter of 1 Samuel, before Hannah's song of praise and prophecy, Hannah experienced soul-deep anguish because of her inability to have children. Similarly, David's songs of praise and prophecy are followed by an account of soul-deep anguish, which serves as a final warning to the sons of David to rule justly in the fear of God. I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.